In February 2009, the heaviest snow in 17 years fell on Chicago. Walter Cross was mopping the marble floor in the main lobby of the Grand Pacific Hotel, one of only 3 six-star hotels in the city, where the presidential suite cost $9,200 a night, and frequent guests included hedge fund investors, CEOs of NASDAQ-listed companies, and the heirs to oil and gas fortunes worth tens of billions of dollars. Walter was 57 years old. He had worked here for 9 years. He wore a blue uniform, faded at the cuffs and elbows. The soles of his safety shoes had been replaced 3 times. He never complained. He never asked for a raise. He just came to work, cleaned, and went home. Every evening he would return to his small apartment on Bell Street, put on a kettle of tea, and open an old, brown leather notebook. Walter had started that notebook in 1988, when he was still working at a meatpacking plant on the south side of Chicago. That plant closed in 1995. Walter took the notebook home. He kept writing. He recorded everything: the changing price of gas, the day his daughter learned to walk, the day his wife left, and later, when he started at the Grand Pacific, he recorded stranger things. For example, he noted that the main revolving door turned 0.3 seconds slower in the winter. He noted that the third-floor hallway light flickered exactly 7 times before going out completely. He noted that elevator number 2 always made a sound like a sigh whenever it passed the 5th floor, and on a day in February 2009, while mopping a basement corridor, Walter noted something new. The east wall, at the end of his 187-pace-long corridor, had a small patch of bubbled paint. Walter stopped. He pressed his thumb into it. It was soft. It was warm. Walter took the leather notebook from his jacket pocket. He wrote, February 19th, 2009, basement east wall. Section near the old Janitor room. Paint bubbled, warm. Strange. That was the first entry about the wall that would later kill 3 people. Walter didn't know that day. He simply cleaned and recorded, as he had done for the past 21 years. But inside the wall, a steam pipe from 1923 and an electrical wire from a 1998 renovation had begun to touch. The heat from the 350-degree Fahrenheit pipe was silently baking the wire's insulation, every day, every hour, every minute. Walter couldn't see it, but he could feel the wrongness at his fingertips, and he wrote it down. Upstairs, 120 vertical feet away, a group of guests was enjoying dinner in the Panorama restaurant, where a bottle of 1982 Lafite Rothschild cost $7,500. None of them thought about the east wall of the basement. None of them knew that a man in a blue uniform was scribbling something into an old leather notebook. But Walter knew, and a month later, he would walk into Hank Morrison's office to talk about it. In March 2009, Walter Cross walked into Hank Morrison's office. Hank was the maintenance manager of the Grand Pacific Hotel. He was 52 and had been here for 11 years. On the wall behind him was a photo of him with the billionaire Ken Griffin, who had once rented out the entire 8th floor for his 55th birthday party, a $473,000 bill for a single night. Next to the photo was a small shelf holding 3 best luxury hotel in Chicago trophies from Forbes magazine. The Grand Pacific was one of only 3 six-star hotels in the city. The presidential suite cost $9,200 a night. Frequent guests included CEOs of NASDAQ-listed companies, hedge fund investors, and the heirs to oil and gas fortunes. Hank was sitting behind a walnut desk, looking at a computer screen displaying the first quarter maintenance cost spreadsheet. He didn't look up when Walter walked in. "Walter," Hank said, his voice flat. "What is it?" Walter placed his leather notebook on the desk, opened to the page with the entry from February 19th. "The east wall in the basement," he said. "The end of the corridor, next to the old generator room. I think there's a problem with the wiring." Hank looked up. His eyes scanned Walter's faded blue uniform, his worn-heeled safety shoes, his calloused hands. A 57-year-old janitor who'd worked here 9 years, with no engineering degrees or certifications whatsoever. Hank sighed. "Go on," Walter explained. He talked about the bubbled paint on the wall. He talked about the drywall underneath that had turned a dark brown. He talked about the steam pipe installed in 1923, when the hotel was first built. He talked about the wiring, replaced during the 1998 renovation, that ran parallel to that pipe. "The pipe is hot," Walter said. "Very hot. I don't know the exact temperature, but it's hot enough to burn your hand if you touch it. It's baking the insulation off the wire." Hank looked at Walter. "How do you know?" "I saw a piece of old wire when the crew was renovating the elevators in 2007. They left a spare coil in a storage room. I picked it up. The casing was brittle, crumbled like a cracker when I squeezed it. You're not an electrician, Walter. I don't need to be an electrician to know what a burnt wire looks like." Hank was quiet for a moment. His hands rested on the keyboard, but he didn't type anything. In his mind, a calculation was running. The cost of hiring an electrical crew to inspect the entire basement wiring system versus the probability that an old janitor was right versus the first quarter maintenance budget, which had already been cut by 12% from last year. "I'll send an email to the electrical team," Hank said. "Thank you, Walter." Walter didn't move. He had heard that sentence enough times in his life to know what it meant. "I'll send an email" is the language of people who don't want to say, "I don't care, it's polite, it's gentle, and it kills people slowly." "Hank," Walter said, "that basement is for VIP parking. This season, there have been up to 6 Ferraris and 4 Lamborghinis parked down there at a time, each one worth from $400,000 to over $1 million. If a spark comes from that wall, the gasoline from those cars will ignite in less than 3 minutes, and the only fire exit from the basement is a narrow staircase just 4 feet wide." Hank looked at Walter a little longer, then he said, "I told you, I'll send an email." Walter picked up his notebook. He put it in his jacket pocket. He turned and walked to the door. In the hallway, just before leaving, he stopped. "Hank, if something happens, I reported it. Today is March 12th, 2009. Remember that." The door closed. That evening, Walter sat in his small apartment on Bell Street. Outside, the snow was still falling. He opened his leather notebook and turned to the latest page. He wrote with an old ballpoint pen, in small, neat script, "March 12th, 2009. Reported to Hank Morrison. East basement wall. Electrical wire touching hot steam pipe, high fire risk." Hank said he'd send an email. "I don't believe him. No one will do anything." He closed the notebook. He put it in the drawer beside his bed. In Hank's office, no email was sent. Instead, Hank opened the bottom drawer of his desk, took out a bottle of 12-year-old whiskey, poured a glass, and drank it alone before going home. The next morning, he remembered nothing of his conversation with Walter. The east wall in the basement remained. The hissing inside continued, and no one heard it. 2 years went by. Walter kept mopping the floors, and the east wall in the basement kept hissing. In June 2011, the Grand Pacific Hotel hired a company for a routine electrical safety inspection. It was a mandatory requirement from their insurance company after a small fire at a rival hotel in a neighboring district. The contract was for $47,000, signed by Hank Morrison himself. The inspection team consisted of 4 people, led by an engineer named Doug Henley, 49 years old, with 22 years of experience in the industry. Doug had worked for 5-star hotels all across America, including the Plaza in New York and the Beverly Hills Hotel in Los Angeles. His reports carried legal weight. A single signature from Doug Henley could save a hotel $200,000 in insurance premiums each year. The inspection team arrived on a Tuesday morning. They wore gleaming black leather shoes and carried infrared thermometers and digital cameras. They checked every floor. They tapped on every electrical panel. They took meticulous notes. In the afternoon, when they had finished with the main areas, they sat down in a first-floor conference room to eat sandwiches and drink espresso from a $12,000 Italian machine. Walter waited. He had waited 2 years for this moment. He knew that Doug's report was the last chance for that wall to be taken seriously. If Doug missed it, no one else ever would. At 2:47 in the afternoon, Walter went down to the basement. He stood his mop in the corner of the hallway and waited. 11 minutes later, the sound of footsteps echoed down the stairs. Doug and a member of his team, a young woman named Vanessa, came down. Walter stepped out from the shadows. "Mr. Doug." Doug stopped. He looked at Walter, the blue uniform, the leather-bound notebook in his hand, the eyes that had seen that wall nearly 1,000 times. "What is it?" "Give me 5 minutes down here, end of the hall, the east wall." Doug looked at Vanessa. Vanessa shrugged. Doug sighed. "All right, 5 minutes." Walter led them down the hall. 187 steps. They stopped in front of the wall. Walter pointed to the patch of bubbled paint, now more than twice as large as it was in 2009. "Here, put your hand here." Doug placed his hand on the wall. Then he jerked it back. The wall was warm, not slightly warm. It was 17 degrees hotter than normal, as his gauge would later confirm. "Listen," Walter said. He fell silent. A hissing sound emanated from within the wall. Then silence, then the hiss again. Doug took out his temperature gauge. He took a reading. The screen displayed 117 degrees Fahrenheit abnormal, but not yet at a level for an emergency alert. He took 2 pictures. He made a note. "Basement east wall, higher than normal temperature. Recommend further inspection." And then Doug put his meter away. "Thank you," he said to Walter. "We'll put it in the report." Walter let out a small sigh of relief. This time, he thought, they'll do something. But Doug did not go down to the basement a second time. He completed the rest of his inspection, flew home on Thursday evening, and wrote his 47-page report in his office in a suburb of Minneapolis. Page 42, section 7.3, line 14, he wrote, "Basement east wall, area of former generator room. Recorded a surface temperature 17 degrees Fahrenheit above ambient, cause undetermined. Recommend further internal inspection by hotel." That was all. The last 5 words were the kill phrase. Further internal inspection by hotel. Doug had shifted the responsibility back to the hotel, a place where no one had any intention of inspecting anything. The report was sent to Hank Morrison at the end of July. Hank flipped through the 47 pages, paused at page 42, read line 14, and closed the report. He filed it in a cabinet, where it would lie dormant for the next 8 years. Walter didn't know that. He waited. 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. No electrician came down to the basement, no meetings were called, no emails were sent. On the evening of the 22nd day, Walter opened his leather-bound notebook. He wrote, "July 15th, 2011. The inspection team came. Mr. Doug saw it. He put his hand on the wall and pulled it back. He took pictures, but it's been 3 weeks and no one has come down. They said it wasn't their job." They said my job is just to mop the floors. He put his pen down. He looked out the window. Outside, Chicago was turning to autumn. Yellow leaves fell on Bell Street. And 12 miles to the southeast, in a filing cabinet in the basement of the Grand Pacific Hotel, Doug Henley's 47-page report was gathering dust. Page 42, section 7.3, line 14 was still there, but no one read it again. No one except Walter, who was not allowed to touch that filing cabinet. 3 more years passed. Walter Cross was now 62 years old. He still woke up at 4:30 in the morning, still walked the 1,200 steps to the hotel, still mopped the basement hallway, and the east wall still hissed. But now it hissed for longer. In 2009, the hiss lasted 4 seconds. In 2011, it was 5 seconds. In 2014, Walter counted 8 continuous seconds of hissing before it fell silent. The interval between hisses had also shortened. In 2009, there were 7 seconds of silence between each hiss. Now there were only 4. The wall was dying. Walter wrote it all down in his leather-bound notebook, but no one read it. No one asked. No one went down to the basement unless there was a problem. The problem arrived on a Saturday evening in late September. At 9:47 p.m., a guest in room 217 pressed the button for the front desk. His voice was concerned. "There's a burning smell in my room, like burning electrical wires." The operator, Rachel, 24 years old, had been working at the hotel for 8 months. She logged the complaint and forwarded it to the engineering department. At that hour, engineering had only 2 people on the night shift. A young electrician named Marcus, 32, who had been in the trade for 3 years, and an old plumber named Pete, 58, who was drunk in the break room. Marcus got the call at 9:52. He sighed. This was his 6th consecutive shift this week. Marcus's pay was $24 an hour. He needed this job to pay the rent on his studio apartment in a suburb where the rent had increased by 18% in the last 2 years. He didn't want trouble. He just wanted to handle it quickly and go home. Marcus grabbed his toolbox and took the elevator to the 2nd floor. He knocked on the door of room 217. A middle-aged man in a white shirt opened the door. On his wrist was a Rolex Daytona watch, worth about $32,000. He was the chief financial officer of a New York-based investment fund. He was in Chicago for a $400 million acquisition. "The smell is over here," the man said, pointing to the wall behind the bed. Marcus stepped inside. He smelled it immediately. It wasn't the smell of dust. It was the smell of melting plastic insulation. He had smelled it once before, during an internship at an old factory in the suburbs. That smell meant wires were burning from inside the wall. Marcus took a screwdriver and removed the nearest electrical outlet cover. He shone his flashlight inside. He saw nothing unusual. He removed a second cover. Nothing there either. He stood up, thinking. This wall, if he remembered the hotel's wiring diagrams correctly, was on the same circuit run as the east wall in the basement. Marcus didn't want to open the wall. If he opened it and found major damage, he would have to report it. A report meant paperwork. Paperwork meant meetings. Meetings meant management would ask why he hadn't discovered it sooner. Marcus called Pete. The drunk plumber, Pete contorted and said, "Just cut a piece of the wall open, kid. If it's bad, replace the section. Then patch it up. No one will know." Marcus listened. He took a drywall saw and cut a 14 by 14-inch rectangle in the wall behind the bed. White dust flew out, coating the hotel's pristine white sheets, the kind woven from 600-thread count Egyptian cotton, each set worth $400. The man with the Rolex frowned. Inside the wall, Marcus saw it. An 18-inch section of electrical wire had turned black. The outer plastic sheath was gone, completely melted away. The copper core within was exposed, dark brown from heat oxidation. Right next to that section of wire was an old steam pipe, its surface so hot Marcus could feel the heat radiating from 4 inches away. The wire had touched the steam pipe. There was no doubt about it. Marcus took 3 pictures with his phone. He cut out the burnt section of wire and used a new connector to splice in a 14-inch replacement piece. He wrapped electrical tape around the splice, replaced the piece of drywall, applied spackle over it, and wiped away the dust. The entire process took 47 minutes. The man with the Rolex asked, "It's done," Marcus said. "It was just a bad piece of old wire. Happens all the time." Marcus packed up his tools and left. He didn't write a report. He didn't report it to management. He didn't tell anyone to check the rest of that wire run. He just did his job and went home. His pay was $24 an hour. Writing reports didn't pay extra. The next morning, when Walter Cross arrived for his shift at 6:02, he immediately saw the mark on the wall of room 217. The new paint didn't match the old. Walter asked Marcus. Marcus told him what happened. After listening, Walter was silent for a long time. Then Walter said, "It will burn again, not in this spot, but somewhere else, on the same line." Marcus looked at Walter. "You just mop the floors, Walter. I've been mopping floors for 14 years. And I know one burnt wire means the whole line is dying." Marcus didn't answer. He turned, went upstairs, and never mentioned the matter a second time. That evening, Walter opened his leather-bound notebook. He wrote, "September 27th, room 217. Electrical leak from the east wall. 18-inch wire burned. 14 inches replaced. The rest of the line is still touching the steam pipe." I told Marcus. He told me I just mop floors. There will be a big fire. It's only a matter of time. He closed the notebook. He put it in the drawer. In room 217, the man with the Rolex had checked out and left. He didn't know that the new wire Marcus had spliced was only 3 inches from the steam pipe. Not 14 inches like the old wire. Just 3 inches. It wasn't touching the pipe right then, but the heat radiating from the pipe would slowly soften the new wire's insulation, and within the next 5 years, it would touch again. Walter knew that, but no one asked him. 3 more years passed. Walter Cross was 65 years old. The Grand Pacific Hotel was sold. A New York-based real estate investment group acquired the entire property. They appointed a new general manager, Bradley Whitmore, 44 years old, who had worked at the Ritz-Carlton hotel chain for 12 years before moving into investment fund management. Bradley Whitmore was the type of person Forbes magazine would call the new generation of luxury hospitality leadership. He had an MBA from Columbia University. He spoke 3 languages, English, French, and Cantonese. He ate whole wheat toast with macadamia nut butter for breakfast, drank medium roast Ethiopian coffee, and drove a $198,000 Mercedes Maybach S650. Bradley never went down to the basement. The basement was a place of machinery, of dust, of people in blue uniforms whose eyes he never met directly. Bradley lived on the 8th floor in a 400-square-foot office with Persian rugs and floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking Lake Michigan. In January 2017, Walter Cross requested a meeting with Bradley. He had to submit a request through Human Resources. Human Resources forwarded it to Bradley's assistant. The assistant's name was Madison, 28 years old, a graduate of Northwestern University. Madison looked at Walter's request for 11 seconds. She saw the line, "I am a janitor. I want to report a fire hazard in the basement." Madison almost deleted it, but she remembered that Bradley was in the middle of an open door. Listen to employees' campaign mandated by the parent company. She scheduled a meeting. 5 minutes. Walter arrived at Bradley's office at 3:15 on a Wednesday afternoon. He wore his cleanly washed blue uniform. He brought his leather-bound notebook. He sat on a dark brown leather chair, facing Bradley across an 8-foot-long walnut desk. Bradley smiled. It was the smile of a man accustomed to speaking with investors, mayors, and CEOs. "Mr. Cross, is it? I understand you've been working here. For how long?" 18 years, sir. I started in 1999. 18 years. A long time. I appreciate your dedication. Now, what did you want to talk to me about?" Walter opened the leather-bound notebook. He turned to the first page he had written about the basement's east wall. February 19th, 2009, he began to speak. He spoke of the steam pipe from 1923. He spoke of the electrical renovation in 1998. He spoke of Doug Henley's report from 2011, page 42, section 7.3, line 14. He spoke of the small fire in room 217 in 2014. Walter spoke for 4 minutes. He spoke coherently, clearly, in the low, steady voice of a man who had told this story in his head 1,000 times. When he got to the part about the burnt wire and Marcus telling him he just mopped floors, Bradley held up a hand. "All right, Mr. Cross," Bradley said. "I understand your concern." Walter stopped. He wasn't finished. He still wanted to talk about the estimated cost to repair the entire line. About $187,000, according to a 2014 quote from an independent electrical contractor. He still wanted to say that this figure was much, much smaller than the $470 million Corbyn had just spent to buy the hotel. But Bradley had raised his hand. That meant he had heard enough. Bradley said, "Mr. Cross, I have read the hotel's safety report. It's 87 pages long. It's signed by 3 professionally certified engineers. They concluded that our facilities meet all the safety standards of the state of Illinois. That report doesn't include the east wall of the basement, sir. The inspection team in 2016 didn't go down there. I was waiting for them in the hallway, but they told me it wasn't within the scope of the inspection." Bradley looked at Walter. His watch, a $32,000 Patek Philippe Calatrava, gleamed under the office lights. "Mr. Cross, do you have any qualifications in electrical engineering?" "No." "Have you ever worked in construction or professional maintenance?" "I've mopped floors for 18 years. So you think I should trust a janitor over 3 professionally certified engineers who have affirmed that this hotel is safe?" Walter fell silent. He had heard this question before, from Hank in 2009, from Doug in 2011, from Marcus in 2014. Only the speaker changed, not the content. "Sir, I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to hire an independent engineer to inspect that wall. It would cost about $8,000. That's the same as one night in the presidential suite." "One night," Bradley smiled. It was a practiced smile. "Mr. Cross, I appreciate your diligence. I really do. But we have a process. That process was established by experts. I can't break protocol just because one employee feels anxious." Walter closed his leather-bound notebook. He stood up. "Mr. Whitmore, your process has ignored 8 years of reports. That's not a process. It's systemic negligence. And it's going to kill people." Bradley said nothing. He just held his smile until Walter had left the room. When the door closed, Bradley took out his phone and texted his assistant, "Madison, don't let any more janitors up here. I don't have time for this." That evening, Walter went home. He didn't eat dinner. He sat in the darkness of his small apartment on Bell Street, looking out the window. Snow was falling. He opened the leather-bound notebook, picked up his pen, and wrote, January 18th, 2017. Met the new manager, Bradley Whitmore. He has an expensive watch and a fake smile. He told me I'm just a janitor. He talked about process. He's exact like the others. I don't know why I still write these things. No one reads them. No one cares. But I write, because if I don't, who will remember? He put the pen down. He looked at the last line. Who will remember? Outside, Chicago lit up. On the 8th floor of the Grand Pacific Hotel, Bradley Whitmore was enjoying a glass-eye 5-year-old Macallan, which cost $1,200 a bottle. He wasn't thinking about Walter Cross. He wasn't thinking about the east wall of the basement. He was thinking about the first quarter revenue report and about his upcoming vacation in Aspen. And the east wall continued to hiss. 10 seconds of hissing, 3 seconds of silence, then the hiss again. Walter knew, but no one asked him. Walter Cross woke up at 4:30 a.m., like every other day. He made coffee. He drank it in 6 minutes. He put on his blue uniform. He stepped out of his apartment on Bell Street at 5:47. But today, he did not walk toward the hotel. Today was Wednesday. His daughter Sarah had dropped off his granddaughter Maya to sleep over the night before. Maya was 9 years old. This morning, she had a low fever, 100.4 degrees. Walter decided to stay home to look after her. He called Human Resources at 5:52, saying he was taking the day off. For the first time in 4 years, Walter Cross was not in the basement hallway at 6:02. The east wall didn't know that. It kept hissing. 11 seconds of hissing. 2 seconds of silence. Then the hiss again. At 2:17 a.m., the first spark jumped from the eastern basement wall. It was only as big as the tip of a chopstick. Pale blue, then it turned orange. It fell into the dry dust at the base of the wall. A pile of dust the cleaning staff wasn't allowed to touch because it was outside their designated zone, according to a work directive from 2008. That pile of dust had not been disturbed in 11 years. The dust caught fire instantly. The flame climbed the wall in 17 seconds. It found old paint that was peeling and dry as paper. It climbed to the ceiling. The basement ceiling was made of pine from 1923, untreated with fire retardant. The fire spread along the crossbeams at a rate of 2 feet per second. At 2:22, a night guard named Oscar smelled smoke. Oscar was 41 years old and had worked security at the Grand Pacific for 6 years. He made $18.50 an hour. He was sitting in the first-floor security office, reviewing the security cameras. The smell of smoke was faint like burnt barbecue from far away. Oscar thought it might be from the restaurant next door. He did not raise the alarm. He just opened a window. At 2:24, thick smoke began to pour from the basement fire escape. Oscar saw it. He ran down the stairs. On the 8th step, he saw the fire. The flames had spread from the eastern wall, swallowing the entire 187-footstep length of Walter's corridor. The temperature at the heart of the blaze was now 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. Oscar turned and ran back up the stairs. He ran to the manual fire alarm. His hands were shaking so badly he had to press the button twice. The time was 2:26. The fire alarm rang after a 9-second delay due to the old system. 2:27. On the floors above, guests began to wake. The third floor had 47 sleeping guests. Among them was a family of 5 from England, in Chicago, for a 12-day vacation that cost a total of $64,000. They had paid $2,200 per night for the family suite. They awoke to the sound of the fire alarm, confused, pulling on coats, and leading each other by the hand into the hallway. The fifth floor had 52 guests. 12 of them were children. A 6-year-old girl named Emma started screaming. Her mother, a lawyer from Boston, tried to calm her, but her own voice was trembling. The smoke had not yet reached the 5th floor, but the air was beginning to grow heavy. The 6th floor had 41 guests. In room 614 were Daniel and Sarah Chen. Daniel was 31. Sarah was 29. They had been married for 6 days. This was their honeymoon. They had saved for 3 years to be able to stay at the Grand Pacific, $7,200 for 6 nights. Daniel was a software engineer. Sarah was a medical resident. They had been planning this trip since the day they got engaged 14 months ago. Sarah woke up first. She heard the fire alarm, but she thought it was her phone's alarm clock. She reached over to turn it off. Daniel was still asleep. 23 seconds later, Sarah realized she smelled smoke. She shook Daniel awake. They dressed hurriedly, taking another 41 seconds to find their shoes. Those seconds would decide everything. At 2:31, the firefighters arrived. 2 fire engines, 1 ladder truck, and a command vehicle from Station 7 on Wacker Drive. 14 firefighters. They saw black smoke pouring from the basement, seeping through the fire escape door cracks and spreading into the main lobby. The captain's name was Mike Kowalski, 49 years old, 27 years on the job. Mike saw the black smoke, thick, dark, coiling like a living thing. He knew immediately this was not a small fire. Black smoke means synthetics are burning. Synthetics mean toxic smoke. Toxic smoke means people will suffocate before the flames even touch them. Isolate the area, Mike commanded. Evacuate floors 1 through 3 first. Floors 4 through 6 after. My team is going to the basement. The time was 2:34. In the basement, the fire had spread to the VIP parking area. 6 Ferraris and 4 Lamborghinis were parked there. The total value of these cars was approximately $5.7 million. Each fuel tank contained about 20 gallons of premium gasoline. The temperature in the basement was now 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The gas tanks began to rupture. Gasoline spilled onto the concrete floor, igniting into a thick sheet of flame. The fire shot up to the ceiling, finding the ventilation system. The system had shut down. The fans had automatically turned off to avoid pushing smoke upwards. But the ducts were still a pathway. The fire roared into the ducts, winding its way to the upper floors. At 2:39, the smoke reached the 5th floor, room 512. Margaret Hollis, 58 years old, was asleep. Margaret was a retired elementary school teacher. She was in Chicago to visit her newborn grandson. She was staying alone because her husband had died 3 years earlier from lung cancer. She did not hear the fire alarm because her hearing aid battery was dead. The smoke entered her room at 2:41. Margaret woke up at 2:43 from a coughing fit. She sat up, seeing nothing in the darkness. The smoke was so thick she couldn't see her hand in front of her face. She tried to crawl to the door. She made it 8 feet. By then her lungs had filled with carbon monoxide. Margaret lost consciousness at 2:46. She never woke up. Room 614. Daniel and Sarah Chen made it to the hallway at 2:44. The 6th floor hallway was not yet filled with smoke, but the air was already unusually hot. Daniel took Sarah's hand and they ran toward the stairwell. It was 47 steps from the door of room 614 to the stairwell door. They ran 30 steps. The 6th floor stairwell door was locked from the inside, impossible to open without a key. It was an old safety regulation to prevent strangers from entering the hotel from the outside via the stairwell. No one had thought to change it in 96 years. Daniel pounded on the door. No one opened it. He pounded again. The rescue team was on the 3rd floor. They couldn't hear his pounding over the sound of the fire alarms and the screaming. Sarah called 911 at 2:47. She said, "We're trapped in the 6th floor hallway. The stairwell is locked. Please, hurry." The call lasted 51 seconds. During those 51 seconds, smoke began to seep through the gap under the stairwell door. The smoke from the basement had crept through the ventilation shafts and reached the 6th floor. At 2:52, Daniel and Sarah sat down low to the floor, where the air was clearest. Daniel held Sarah. Sarah was crying. Daniel said, "Listen to me. We're going to be okay. Help is on the way." Help arrived at 2:58, but they couldn't get to the 6th floor because the stairwell was locked. They had to run up to the 5th floor to find another staircase, which took another 11 minutes. By the time they opened the 6th floor door, Daniel and Sarah were unconscious. They were no longer breathing. Two young, healthy bodies, just beginning their honeymoon, lay curled together on the hallway floor. Sarah's hand was still holding Daniel's. At 3:16, firefighters brought the basement fire under control. They had pumped 47,000 gallons of water into the hotel in 45 minutes. The basement was flooded ankle-deep. The Ferraris and Lamborghinis were now nothing but blackened metal frames, the eastern wall. The one Walter Cross had warned about for 12 years had completely collapsed. The number of casualties was confirmed at 4:02 in the morning, 3 people dead. Margaret Hollis, 58 years old, Daniel Chen, 31 years old, Sarah Chen, 29 years old, 17 people injured, 4 in critical condition. Walter Cross heard the sirens at 2:23. He was lying in bed next to Maya. Her fever had broken, and she was sleeping soundly. Walter got up and walked out onto the balcony. He looked toward the Grand Pacific Hotel, 1.2 miles to the southeast. He saw the flashing red and orange lights, and a column of black smoke rising so high it blotted out the stars. He stood a long time. A very long time. Maya called from inside the room. "Grandpa, what is it?" Walter went back inside. He stroked Maya's head. "It's nothing, sweetie. Go back to sleep." He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat down beside the bed, opened his leather-bound notebook, and wrote a single entry. October 23rd, 2019. It happened. 3 people dead. I was home today. Maya had a fever. If I had been there at 2 a.m., would it have made a difference? I don't know. But I wrote. I wrote for 12 years, and no one read it. He put the pen down. He looked out the window. The column of black smoke was still rising, and Walter Cross, the man who had tried to stop this for longer than anyone, could only sit there, helpless, his leather-bound notebook in his hands. For the first time in 12 years, he wrote nothing more. 4 months after the fire, the official investigations was opened at the Cook County Courthouse in Chicago. Courtroom number 7, 4th floor. A 1,200 square foot room with an 18-foot ceiling and dark oak-paneled walls from the 1930s. The spectator benches were hard wood, without cushions. Pale yellow light cast from old ceiling lamps. The air was heavy with the smell of old paper and sweat. The 3 victims' families sat in the front row. Margaret Hollis's parents, 2 elderly people, 82 and 79 years old, sat side by side, holding hands, their eyes red and swollen. Daniel Chen's parents, a Chinese-American couple from San Jose, had flown 2,000 miles to be here. They brought a photograph of Daniel and Sarah on their wedding day, placing it on the empty seat beside them. Sarah was an only child. Her mother, Mrs. May Chen, had been crying non-stop for 4 months. Bradley Whitmore sat at the defendant's table, next to the corporation's 3 lawyers. Each lawyer charged $1,200 an hour. They wore black suits, grey ties, and no expressions. Bradley wore a navy blue suit, a Brioni, worth $7,500. His hair had been carefully trimmed that morning. His hands rested on the table, his fingers long and slender, not trembling, not clenched. He had been coached. Walter Cross sat in the very last row. Row 12, aisle D, seat number 4. He wore an old blue flannel shirt and faded khaki pants. No one had invited him to sit up front. He had not been called as a witness. The plaintiff's lawyers had reviewed his file and decided there was sufficient documentary evidence from the emails and reports. They didn't need an old janitor on the witness stand. Walter didn't mind. He just wanted to listen. The hearing began at 9 a.m. The lead plaintiff's attorney was named Eleanor Vance, 54 years old. She had won 37 similar cases in her 22-year career. She was famous for her relentless style of questioning, digging deeper and deeper until the opposition contradicted themselves or confessed. Eleanor started with the experts. An independent electrical engineer named Richard Park, 61 years old, had surveyed the hotel 3 weeks after the fire. Richard stood before the jury, 8 men and women from Chicago, dressed in ordinary clothes, carrying the weariness of people forced to listen to talk of death right before Christmas. Richard presented the evidence: 47 photographs, 12 technical drawings, 3 video clips filmed by a drone inside the hotel after the fire. The east basement wall, Richard said, pointing to photograph number 14, and contained a steam pipe installed in 1923 and an electrical line installed in 1998. These 2 systems ran parallel, 4 inches apart. Over time, the heat from the pipe melted the wire's insulation coating. We found evidence of this phenomenon extending across 214 feet of wiring, not just in the section that burned, but along the entire line. Eleanor Vance. So what was the root cause of the fire? Richard Park. The electrical wire made direct contact with the hot steam pipe. A spark was generated. The fire spread through 11 years of accumulated dry dust, then to the wooden ceiling, and up through the ventilation system to the upper floors. Eleanor. Could this incident have been prevented? Richard. Easily. The cost to replace that entire electrical line was $187,000, according to a 2014 quote. The cost to install a thermal insulation system between the wire and the pipe was $23,000. Either one of those measures would have prevented the fire. The room was silent. Sarah Chen's mother began to cry. Eleanor Vance. And why were none of these measures taken? Richard, because no one inspected that wall. Next, Eleanor called a hotel employee as a witness. Marcus, a 32-year-old electrician, stood before the jury at 11:17 a.m. He wore a cheap suit borrowed from his brother-in-law. His hand trembled as he held the paper to be sworn in. Eleanor, Mr. Marcus, do you remember the incident in room 217 in September of 2014? Marcus, yes, Eleanor. What did you do? Marcus recounted the story. He told them about the burning smell. He told them about opening the wall and seeing the charred wire. He told them he only replaced 14 inches of wire and closed the wall back up. His voice grew quieter. Eleanor, why didn't you report this incident to management? Marcus was silent. For a long moment, Eleanor, Mr. Marcus, I was afraid of losing my job. I thought if I reported it, they'd ask why I hadn't found it sooner. They'd blame me. I just wanted to. Fix it quickly and go home. Sarah Chen's mother stood up. A lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder, and she sat back down. Eleanor, and after that, did you report it to anyone? Marcus, yes, I told Mr. Walter. But he's just the janitor. I didn't think. Eleanor, you didn't think what? Marcus, I didn't think I needed to report it any further. In the courtroom, Walter Cross shook his head slightly. He wasn't angry with Marcus. He just felt sad. Marcus was just another worker, trying to get by, making $24 an hour. The system had made Marcus afraid, and that fear had killed people. At 2:15 in the afternoon, it was Bradley Whitmore's turn. He walked to the witness stand with a confident gait, like a man who had stepped onto hundreds of stages before crowds. He swore the oath. He sat down, adjusted his tie, and looked directly at Eleanor Vance. Eleanor did not smile. She opened a file 4 inches thick, a copy of 47 emails from 2011 to 2009, all of them mentioning Walter Cross's warnings. Eleanor, Mr. Whitmore, were you aware that the maintenance worker, Walter Cross, had been warning about the east basement wall since 2009? Bradley, I was made aware after the fire. Eleanor, did you read the report Mr. Cross sent in January of 2017? Bradley, I read a summary, but I'm not a technical expert. I forwarded it to the engineering department. Eleanor, and what did the engineering department do? Bradley, they told me there was no issue. Eleanor, did you double-check? Bradley, I trusted my team. Eleanor, did you request an independent report? Bradley, no, the cost for such a report was unnecessary. We already had annual safety reports from a certified firm. Eleanor, those annual safety reports did not include the eastern basement wall. Were you aware of that? Bradley was silent. For the first time, his hands clenched slightly. Eleanor, Mr. Whitmore, I have evidence that the reports from 2016, 2017, and 2018, all 3 of them, only inspected high-priority areas designated by the hotel, and the hotel did not designate the basement as a high-priority area. Is that correct? Bradley, I was not directly involved in determining the priority areas. Eleanor, but you are the CEO. You have ultimate responsibility for everything in the hotel. Is that not correct? Bradley, theoretically, yes. Eleanor, not theory, fact. You sign the payroll. You sign the budget. You sign the insurance contracts. You also sign the annual safety reports, correct? Bradley, yes. Eleanor, so do you believe you bear some responsibility for the deaths of 3 people? The room was so quiet you could hear the hiss of a steam pipe inside the courthouse wall. A painful coincidence. Bradley looked at Eleanor. He looked at the victims' families. He looked at the jury. Then he spoke, his voice calm, practiced. Ms. Vance, we have procedures. Those procedures were followed. This was an unfortunate accident. No one can foresee every risk. I worked with a team of professionals. I trusted them. And I cannot be held responsible for an incident that no one in the industry could have predicted. Eleanor Vance asked no more questions. She had her answer. In the back row, Walter Cross closed his eyes. He counted. 4,015 days since the first report. 47 emails sent. He had recounted them last night. 3 people dead. And now, a man in a $7,500 Brioni suit had just stood before the court and said no one could have foreseen it. Walter opened his eyes. He stood up. He walked out of the courtroom. No one noticed. In the hallway, Walter sat on a wooden bench. He opened his leather-bound notebook. He wrote, February 19th, 2020, the hearing. Mr. Bradley Whitmore called it an unfortunate accident. He said, no one could have foreseen it. He talked about procedures. He talked about experts. He didn't say a single word of apology. Not to Margaret's family, not to Daniel and Sarah's parents, and not to me. I wrote for 4,015 days. I sent 47 emails, and he calls it an accident. I don't know why I'm still writing, but I am. Because if I don't write, who will remember Margaret? Who will remember Daniel and Sarah? He closed the notebook. He put it in his pocket. He stood up, walked down the stairs, out of the courthouse, and onto the street. Outside, winter was setting in on Chicago. Snow was falling, and Walter Cross, 67 years old, an unofficially retired janitor, walked alone on the Dearborn Street sidewalk, the leather notebook in his pocket, and 3 names on his mind: Margaret, Daniel, Sarah. He would not forget. The lawsuit ended in May of 2020. The court ruled that the corporation owning the Grand Pacific Hotel must pay a total of $217 million. This figure included $47 million for the families of the 3 victims, $100 million for property damage, including $5.7 million for 10 incinerated supercars, and $50 million for legal fees and administrative penalties. Bradley Whitmore was not criminally prosecuted. His lawyers successfully negotiated a deal. The corporation accepted full civil liability, but no individuals were charged. Bradley lost his job. He received a severance package worth $1.2 million. 18 months plus bonus. He returned to New York, rented an apartment on the Upper East Side for $12,000 a month, and began looking for his next CEO position. His first job interview was with a 5-star hotel chain in Miami. During the interview, he was asked about the Grand Pacific fire. Bradley replied, "It was an unfortunate incident related to old infrastructure. I did everything according to procedure. The system failed, not me." He didn't get that job, nor the next 8. Eventually, Bradley Whitmore accepted a CEO position for a 3-star hotel chain in Ohio with an annual salary of $180,000, only 15% of what he used to make. But he never once admitted he was wrong. In a phone interview with the Chicago Tribune in August of 2020, Bradley said, "I followed the procedure. I listened to the employee's report. I forwarded it to the specialized department. If anyone is to blame, it's the state's safety inspection system, not me." When the reporter asked if he had anything to say to the victims' families, Bradley said, "I send my deepest condolences. It was a tragedy." He didn't apologize. He didn't take responsibility. He just said, "Condolences," a safe, harmless, and empty word. Hank Morrison, the maintenance manager who ignored Walter's first warning in 2009, was fired in June of 2020. He didn't receive a severance package. He also didn't admit his mistake. In a later Facebook post, Hank wrote, "I worked there for 22 years. They kicked me out like a dog, all because of a technical error that no one could have known about beforehand." Marcus, the electrician who performed the temporary fix in 2014, lost his professional license. He switched to being a delivery truck driver for Amazon, making $19 an hour, $5 less than his old salary. But Marcus, at least, was a little different from the rest. The night before the trial ended, Marcus went to see Walter. He knocked on the door of the Bell Street apartment at 8 p.m. Walter opened the door, recognized Marcus, and invited him in. They sat in the small room, 2 men who had once worked in the same building but had never really spoken to each other. Marcus said, "Mr. Walter, I'm sorry." Walter was silent. "In 2014, when you told me it's going to burn again, I didn't listen. I told you to just clean the floors. I'm sorry." Walter looked at Marcus. "How old are you?" 32. "You're young. You were afraid of losing your job, I understand. This system is built to make people like you afraid. You're not to blame, but you have to remember, if a janitor tells you there's a problem, don't tell him to just clean the floors." Marcus nodded. He stood up, shook Walter's hand, and left. Walter never saw him again. In September of 2020, the city of Chicago passed a new ordinance. It was officially named the Hotel Infrastructure Safety Act, number 2020-47. But in the hotel industry, everyone called it by another name, Walter's Rule, the main provision of the ordinance. Any safety report from any employee, regardless of position or department, must be logged in a separate system and reviewed within 30 days by an independent engineer. It could not be forwarded via internal email. It could not be noted and filed in a cabinet. There had to be action. There had to be a record. There had to be a signature. The law was passed with a vote of 47-3. A reporter from the Chicago Sun-Times asked the mayor, "Why call it Walter's Rule?" The mayor replied, "Because a man named Walter Cross tried to tell them for 12 years, and nobody listened." The reporter asked if Walter Cross had been invited to the signing ceremony. The mayor said, "We sent an invitation. He didn't come. The truth is, Walter did come. He stood outside City Hall in the rain, looking through the glass door. He saw the politicians in their suits, the lawyers holding their pens, the reporters raising their cameras. He saw them applaud. He saw them shake hands. He saw his name mentioned at the podium, Walter's Rule, but not one of them looked toward him. The old man standing in the rain, his coat soaked through, the leather notebook in his pocket. Walter turned away. He walked back to his apartment on Bell Street. 1.2 miles, the rain fell. When he got home, he took off his coat, hung it on a hook, and opened the leather notebook. He wrote, September 17th, 2020. They passed the new law. They call it Walter's Rule. They invited me. I went. They didn't see me. I'm okay. It's just, I wish someone had asked me, not to honor me. Just to ask, "Are you okay, Mr. Walter?" He put the pen down. He looked out the window. The rain was still falling. In December of 2020, Walter Cross retired. He was 69 years old. There was no big party, no farewell gift, no speech from the board of directors, because the board of directors no longer existed. Motherca and Grand Pacific had closed permanently in March. The building stood empty, its windows frosted over, the basement's eastern wall demolished, leaving only a gaping black hole. Walter's retirement party was held in his daughter Sarah's living room, a third-floor apartment in a building with no elevator on Bell Street. 11 people came: Sarah, her husband David, his granddaughter Maya, and 8 former colleagues from the hotel, the janitors, security guards, housekeepers, and an old electrician named Louis, 73, who had retired 3 years before Walter. They brought a cake, a chocolate cake from the corner bakery that cost $28. Maya lit 4 candles on top. Walter blew them out. Everyone applauded. Louis stood up, raised a glass of orange juice and said, "To Walter, the only man in that hotel who dared to tell the truth." Everyone drank. Walter said nothing. He just smiled, a small, fleeting smile, but a real one. Maya ran to his side. She was 9 years old, with long black hair and bright eyes like her mother's. Maya handed him a gift wrapped in blue paper, the color of his old uniform. Walter opened it. Inside was a new notebook. A blue hardcover filled with blank white paper without a single word written in it. On the first page, Maya had written in purple ink, "For Grandpa," to keep writing the things no one wants to hear. Walter looked at the words. He looked at Maya. He didn't cry. He just held her for a long time. That night, after everyone had gone home, Walter sat alone in his apartment. In front of him were 2 notebooks. The old brown leather one, its corners faded, the spine frayed, its elastic band broken and replaced with an old shoelace, and the new blue one, sturdy, smelling of paper, without a single scratch. Walter opened the old notebook. He turned the pages. The first page, February 19th, 2009. The last page, September 17th, 2020, 4,015 days. hundreds of pages filled with small, neat, careful handwriting. The evidence of 12 years of trying to tell people who didn't want to listen. He closed the old notebook. He placed it on the bookshelf between other books. Old novels, Maya's comics, and the dictionary that had belonged to his wife, who had passed away 15 years ago. He picked up the new notebook. He opened it to the first page, where Maya had written. He picked up his pen and turned to the second page. He wrote, December 24th, 2020, Christmas Eve. I retired today. Maya gave me this notebook. I don't know what I'll write anymore. There's no more hotel. No more wall. No more people telling me to just mop the floors. But I will write, because if I don't, who will remember Margaret Hollis? Who will remember Daniel and Sarah Chen? Who will remember that an old man tried to stop it all? He paused his pen. He looked out the window. Outside, Chicago was lit up in red and green for Christmas. To the southeast, there was no more smoke rising from the Grand Pacific. The hotel had gone dark in March. Walter looked in that direction for a minute. Then he drew the curtains. He turned on his desk lamp. He opened the blue notebook to the next page. He kept writing. Walter Cross sat alone in his small apartment on Bell Street. It was past 11 at night. Outside the window, snow was falling lightly, covering the awning and balcony railing with a thin white layer. Red and green Christmas lights blinked on the building across the street, but their light couldn't penetrate the thick curtains Walter had drawn 30 minutes earlier. He didn't like blinking lights. They reminded him of the sparks from the eastern wall. On the small wooden table in front of him, 2 notebooks lay open. The old leather one on the left, the new blue one on the right. A black ballpoint pen, the cheap kind, bought at some supermarket for $3 a pack of 12, was placed parallel to the edge of the table. Walter had finished the first entry in the blue notebook. It was short. It didn't have the precise numbers of his previous entries. It was only 47 words. December 24th, 2020, Christmas Eve. I retired today. Maya gave me this notebook. I don't know what I will write anymore, but I will write, because if I don't, who will remember? He put the pen down. He looked at his words for a moment. Then he picked the pen up and wrote more below. I remember Margaret Hollis. She was 58. She was a teacher. She came to Chicago to visit her new grandchild. She died because the batteries in her hearing aid ran out. If someone had checked her room at 2A, she might have lived, but no one checked. He paused. I remember Daniel and Sarah Chen. He was 31. She was 29. They had been married for 6 days before the fire. They saved for 3 years to be able to stay at the Grand Pacific, $7,200 for 6 nights. They died because the stairwell door was locked. One door, 47 steps. One locked door. He looked at the words he had just written. His hand didn't tremble. His eyes didn't burn. But there was a feeling in his chest. Heavy, as if someone had placed a stone on it and left it there for the past 14 months. Walter put the pen down. He got up, walked to the kitchen, and poured a glass of water. He took small sips. He looked at the wall clock, a cheap battery-operated pendulum clock that had been 17 minutes slow for the past 3 years. Walter never fixed it. He didn't need to know the exact time. He had woken up at 4:38 a.m. for 19 years without an alarm. His body remembered the time. His body still remembered. He set the glass down, returned to the table, and sat. He picked up the pen again. They call it Walter's rule. They passed the law. They say this won't happen again. But I don't believe them. I've seen too much. They'll ignore things again. They'll tell someone else to just mop the floors. There will be other walls, other pipes, other men and women trying to speak the truth, and one day there will be another fire. He stopped. Thought. but I still write. I write for Maya. Maya is 9. One day, Maya will grow up, Maya will have a job, and if Maya is the one who has to speak a truth no one wants to hear, I want her to know that her grandfather did it before, and her grandfather is okay. Not rich, not famous, but okay. Walter closed the blue notebook. He placed it on top of the old leather one. He stood up, took both notebooks, and walked toward the small bookshelf in the corner of the room. On the shelf, between the old books, there was an empty space. Walter placed the 2 notebooks in that empty space, the old leather one below, the new blue one on top. He took a step back and looked at them. Then he reached for the shelf, took out the blue notebook, opened it to the last page, and wrote one more line, P.S. If anyone is reading this after I'm gone, know that I tried so very hard, and I don't regret it, not one word, not one day. He set the pen down one last time. He closed the notebook. He placed it back on the shelf. He turned off the light. Darkness filled the room. Outside, the snow was still falling. To the southeast, 1.2 miles away, the Grand Pacific building stood empty, its windows frozen, no lights within. The eastern basement wall had been torn down. The steam pipe from 1923 had been cut. The wiring from 1998 had been ripped out, but the leather notebook was still there, and the words inside remained. Walter Cross lay down on the bed. He didn't pray. He didn't dream. He just closed his eyes and listened. Outside the window, there was no more hissing. Peace. If you have ever warned about something at work and been ignored, please share your story in the comments. Not to change the past, just so others know they are not alone. And if you are the one who has to speak a truth that no one wants to hear, remember Walter Cross. He wrote for 12 years. He was told to just mop the floors dozens of times, but he did not stop. Don't stop. Write it down. Record it. Send the email. Save the proof. Because one day, when the fire comes, whether it's a literal fire or a systemic one, your words might save someone. Thank you for listening to the story of Walter Cross. Please share this video if you think its message needs to be heard. And remember, no one is just a janitor.